Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good! Oh, yeah?
Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Happy NBA schedule release day. To talk about it, well, that's what we're going to be doing today here at The Lager Line, your home for podcast commentary on all things Houston Rockets basketball. As always, served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing, their beer developed in collaboration with the Houston Rockets. I'm your host, Ben DuBose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire and contributor to Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of the team. Joined as always by my good friend, co-host and producer out of Portugal, Paulo Alves. You can follow him on Twitter /X at Paulo Alves NBA, me on there at Ben DuBose. So as we're chatting this Thursday night, August 15th, it's a big day on the NBA calendar because every team in the association got its 82-game schedule for the upcoming 2024-25 season. So we can all start planning out our next 8 months and many of our activities through mid-April, hopefully longer than that for a Rockets season that for the first time in a while has some realistic postseason ambitions. Not a given, but coming off a 41-41 year and with a lot of young talent that should get better. Also the addition of guys like Steven Adams, Reed Shepherd in the offseason. A lot of us are very excited about what this Rockets team can do. You also have Alperen Şengün, Tari Eason coming back from injuries. So there's a lot to like about this Rockets team. And with this schedule, I think, so if you haven't seen it, you can go to Rockets.com or any media outlet that you choose, the Chronicle, ESPN, USA Today, wherever you want to go, just search for the NBA schedule and you can probably sort it by team if you're not already on a Rockets page. So if you want to have that in front of you while you're listening to us talk about it, feel free to do so. But my initial thoughts are that this schedule sets up pretty well for a Rockets team that, despite being relatively young, actually has a lot more continuity than most NBA teams because basically the entire rotation is back. The only newcomer on day one that we know is going to be in the rotation that wasn't last year is Steven Adams, and that's a 15 minutes per game backup center role and a 31-year-old true professional who knows who he is in the NBA. Other than that, the starters are back. 90+% of the rotation is the same guys you had from a year ago. The coaching staff led by Ime Udoka is the same. So in an NBA where so much upheaval happens each offseason with free agency and trades and coaching changes, the Rockets, despite being relatively young, do have a lot more advantages when you think of continuity, chemistry, players knowing each other. Even though Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün are really young, these are perhaps your two most important players, they're going into year 4 of playing together. So there are some advantages when you look at how this Rockets team is constructed that should have them more ready early in the season. We know they finished strong last year, had the 11-game winning streak, the 12-1 stretch in March, and to be able to start with an opening 11 games that only has 3 contenders in there, the Thunder, the Mavericks, the Knicks. Other than that, a lot of teams like the opener at home against Charlotte, second game against Memphis, although the Grizzlies could be a little better this year getting John Morant, Desmond Bane, guys like that back from injury or suspension. You have the Wizards in those opening 11 games. Hopefully the Rockets are finally due to beat an aging Warriors team that lost Klay Thompson in the offseason. You look at the 2 games against San Antonio, games 3 and 4 on the road. You also play them again, game 8 here in Houston. I know the Spurs with Wemby are getting better, but the Rockets on paper are a better team. So you look at the first 11 games, again, 8 are going to be, I would say, neutral to clearly favored. The only games where you're clear underdogs are the Mavs, the Thunder, the Knicks, and the Knicks are at home. So it's a very manageable start. You broaden out a little bit. 11 of the first 18 games are at home. And so for a Rockets team that has advantages already when it comes to continuity and also gets a little bit of an easier start to the schedule, I think all the ingredients are there for this team to to start well. And I think that's so important because in a year that's not about contending, at least not at a championship level, it's still about development. It's about learning more information. And so if you get off to a good start and are not just on the fringe of playoff contention for most of the season, but hopefully squarely in that field, then it makes all the games more important. And so it puts your young players in the right frame of mind to keep getting better throughout the season. Now, there is a trade-off in that as the year progresses, the schedule does get a little more difficult. You have a stretch from early January through early February where I think 13 of 17 are on the road. You have a challenging close to the year where you're playing a lot of different playoff teams, or potential playoff teams at least, the Lakers, the Suns, the Clippers, the Nuggets, teams like that down the stretch of the home stretch of the year, the last 7 or 8 games. But by and large, I think when you're a young team like the Rockets, the advantages of starting fast outweigh the downside of a more difficult close, especially because some of those playoff teams that are on your schedule in March and April, it may not be as difficult as it seems on paper because a lot of those teams may be conserving for the playoffs. We know March is often a weird month on the NBA calendar. The season finale, the week the playoffs start, I highly doubt the Rockets are facing a Denver team that's playing both Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray for starters minutes, unless somehow they're right on the playoff/play-in cut line, which I can't really see that happening. So that's just one example. The Nuggets, the home season finale in Houston, where it's more difficult on paper than it likely will be on the court. And so that's not meant to say there aren't risks to the schedule being backloaded. I'm sure we'll talk about that as we make our way through today's episode. But I think by and large, when you consider where the Rockets are as an organization, the young players are trying to develop and hope take another step forward this season, having a manageable start to the year where hopefully, let's say after those first 18 games, maybe you're 11-7 and 2-0 in cup play. I think by and large, if the trade-off is having to have a few more difficult games once the calendar turns to 2025, I think you'll take that if you can take care of business at the start of the year. So by and large, I think I like the way this Rockets schedule sets up. Paulo, what were your initial impressions when you looked at what the Rockets drew in this upcoming 82-game season?
Yeah, so first off, I'll just get ahead of it and apologize to the listeners. My voice is not the best. I've been dealing with COVID for a couple of weeks now. I don't know why it's taken this long, but if voice cracks or I have to cough, I'll try to mute. But if I can't, you know, I apologize in advance. When it comes to the schedule, listen, I think at this point in the Rockets, trajectory towards being a contender, I thought that last year the way the schedule was structured would be really important because I thought we needed to get off to a strong start because of how much doubt there was around the team, because of how many new pieces were trying to gel together. You really need the players to buy into what the coach is selling, especially when it's a defense-oriented head coach. And that happened, and so that was perfect. And then the season kind of collapsed anyways. If people recall, we were, solidly a playoff team through 20, 30 games, and then it all fell apart. So I'm at the point where, kind of obviously there's some things that are nicer to have than others, but regardless of what the schedule is, it's not an excuse anymore, right? It's the second year with the same head coach. Whether it's a slow start or the opposite, just have to go out and play the team that's in front of you. And the West is so stacked that we can't hide behind being underdogs in a lot of these games, because if we only expected to win the games that we are favored in, we're not going to make the playoffs, and that's the goal, right? I think everybody agrees that this season the goal is to make the playoffs. That's why reaching the play-in last season was so important. So looking at the schedule, obviously, I think the easy-ish start is both a blessing and a curse, because if you start off slow, and you can start off slow because the competition is really good, or you can start off slow because shots aren't falling, or there's some rust involved, or whatever it is, right? And if you for some reason you start off slow, you're being extra punished because you're starting off slow against teams that you should be able to beat, and so teams that will perhaps be gimmies when the Rockets are, with the season in full flow and in rhythm, at the beginning of the season might not be. And at the beginning of the season, the weaker teams obviously some exceptions to it, but typically everybody's optimistic, and even the weaker teams think that they have a shot. And when the Rockets were bad, we started off the season always optimistic, and then as the season went on, there were obviously games where the Rockets entered into the game already expecting to lose, especially in the Steven Silas, or only in the Steven Silas years. So I think the easy start is both a blessing and a curse. Teams like San Antonio, even Charlotte, Golden State, perhaps at the beginning of the season still think that they have a shot at making the play-in or something like that. In San Antonio with Chris Paul, Charlotte hopefully with a healthy LaMelo Ball, still healthy Mark Williams, that they didn't have through the later stages of last season, will probably be gunning for something that they probably won't be gunning for as the season goes along. I think something that's important to point out is I think we have 16 back-to-backs, and we saw last season that even though we are a young team, or even though we are a young team without being a team full of rookies, back-to-backs seem to affect us more than the typical NBA team. And I know you expect back-to-backs to hit you, really hard when players are on their first and second years, and then back-to-backs become an advantage from the third year, just estimating here, from the third year until they're age 28 or something like that, because at that point, you are young, but you're not new, right? And so you already know how to deal with that kind of stuff.
You're used to 80-game seasons and not 30 to 35-game college seasons.
Exactly. Yeah. And so because of that, I expect that the back-to-backs won't be as huge as a factor as they've been in seasons prior. And then, since that, I think you made a good point. The last game against Denver, usually, the games in the middle of the season, they are what they are. Usually, the start, the finish are the ones that you can kind of predict, because they have clear tendencies. To close the season, I think the Denver game probably won't be a starters game for Denver. But then, besides that, I think what you want to look for in the last 2 games of the season is how many of these teams will be in tank mode, because I think it's hard to predict whether the Lakers, the Clippers, the Warriors, OKC, Lakers again, Phoenix, whether these teams will be.
You do have 2 against the Jazz. They should be fully in tank mode.
That was exactly the point that I was about to make.
And one against Atlanta before that. So yeah.
Yeah, there's Utah will probably be in tank mode. There's a possibility that Atlanta will be in tank mode unless they surprise everyone. The Lakers and the Clippers might be in tank mode at that point, although no, the Clippers won't be because Thunder have their pick, but the Lakers might. OKC obviously won't be. Phoenix doesn't have their pick. We have their. Is it this year we have their pick? I should be better informed on this, but I don't think that
there's a complicated swap right to it this year, so it could be impactful. Yeah,
right. So I think it's even within these teams, it's hard to predict how many of them will actually be contending for something at that point. But as I said, to begin my point, we're at a stage where every team's difficult, besides the 5 tanking teams on each conference that sometimes aren't even 5. Last year they weren't even 5. And so you just got to play whoever's in front of you. And it's fun to speculate on how the schedule will impact the season. But I think we're at that point in the trajectory of this team towards contention that it shouldn't matter as much. And guys just got to show up and play whoever's in front of them. And we can't be scared of the Celtics, and we can't take the Hornets for granted. I think those are things that are easy to let happen when teams as young as ours is, or as young as they were last season in their first season of trying to contend or just trying to be good. I think at this point, especially with Ime Udoka as the head coach, I don't think that they'll let that type of stuff happen again. Or I expect that they won't. I hope they won't. And so just play whoever is in front of you. At the end of the day, it might make a difference because 1 or 2 games may decide a playoff spot versus a play-in spot, or even a playoff spot versus a non-play-in spot at all. But at the end of the day, every team has to deal with the same problems. I will also just quick little note. I was surprised it didn't mention Memphis as someone who we might not be favored against. I expect from the rip for us to not be favored against them, although.
I think we will at home. I would think. Yeah, it'll be closer to Hornets. I think so. I mean, I think, especially early in the year, the Grizzlies aren't going to be given a ton of trust equity. I could be wrong, but I don't think people are going to assume that they flipped the switch to who they were in large part because actually that team 2 years ago, the last time they were good, had Dylan Brooks and Steven Adams, who are now with the Rockets. So I could see it being closer to a pick'em, but I still think Rockets by 2 or 3, something in that, playing at home.
Yeah, I'm definitely more confident now than with them and Compton than I was before when we didn't have a single soul that could kind of guard them. Right. Pretty confident the men will be able to.
So a few odds and ends that I want to note before we get back into the nitty gritty of how the schedule sets up, because I do think there's an interesting macro discussion to be had about the trade deadline in early February. I believe it'll be on Thursday the 6th. It's usually on the Thursday, either Thursday the 6th or Thursday the 13th, probably the 6th, because they usually don't do it leading directly into the All-Star break. So the stretch, the month before that, when you have 13 of 17 on the road, there's some very interesting implications there if things go south, particularly if they underachieve with this relatively easy start to the season that we've been talking about. But before we get into a little more macro discussion, so Paulo mentioned the 16 back-to-backs, which I think lead the league or are second most. That's somewhat offset by the fact that they do not have a road trip all season long, longer than 4 games. And most of them are 3 or less. I think that's sort of the trade-off. They have more back-to-backs, but then as, I guess, something of a perk, they're not asking the NBA, that is, the Rockets, to go on these 6-7 game trips, which they have in seasons past. They have a 6-game homestand, they have a couple of 5-gamers, but the road trips aren't nearly as long. So I think with the back-to-backs, you're hoping that by not being on the road as long, you can absorb it a little bit more than if you're having one of those marathon trips where it feels like you haven't slept in your own bed for 2-3 weeks. And we know that this past season, it was that 6-game East Coast trip in early to mid-January when the injuries started piling up as well. That's when Tari Eason was lost. That's when this season really started to go off the rails a little bit. And while they salvaged it with that 11-game winning streak in March and got within a half game of the play-in at one point, it did feel like there was a couple of months in there where the games weren't all that meaningful because they weren't really in the postseason picture. And of course, that's what you're hoping to avoid this year, because not only do you want to get in the postseason, regardless, you want the benefit of all the games feeling meaningful for the purposes of development, learning, all those types of things. So we'll see how it shakes out. I do think you can argue the Rockets are a little bit deeper this year. The Steven Adams addition, now Cam Whitmore and Min Thompson going into year 2. Reed Shepherd, based on his shooting, should be more ready to contribute than a lot of rookies. So if you're a deep team, that might help you on those back-to-backs as well. Now, as far as the overall metrics, I saw someone point out on Twitter that the Rockets, according to Tankathon's strength of schedule metric, have the 3rd most difficult schedule in the NBA. That's actually something that's baked in, because by and large, teams in the Western Conference play more difficult schedules than the East because the Western Conference is more difficult. That's just how it works. You play most teams in the West 4 times a year, teams in the East twice. So unless the leagues dramatically change in terms of the balance of power, how strong the East is, how strong the West is, you would expect teams in the West to play harder schedules. And then just from a math perspective, even though the Rockets were 41-41 last year, they had just there were only 4 teams worse in the standings out west than the Rockets, who finished 11th. So when you compare it to other West teams, which is really the only comparison, and then you look and say, hey, the Rockets, because they're one of the 5 worst teams, are thus playing more games against the 10 teams that advance to the play-in tournament or beyond, then of course teams at the bottom 5 of the West standings are going to be among the teams having the more difficult schedule. That's just math. That's how it works. And the Rockets have the 3rd most difficult schedule. To no surprise, the 2 teams right in front of them, Portland Trailblazers, Utah Jazz, those are teams that were right below the Rockets in the West standings. So they have the same headwinds, but even more, because with worse records, they're playing even more teams that are ahead of them in the standings. And the Spurs, who are a little bit behind the Rockets at 7th rather than 3rd, I mean, that's just small potatoes in terms of the difference there. So the bottom line, the SOS metrics, I wouldn't put too much weight on them. We knew the Rockets just based on being in the Western Conference, and all these metrics are calculated based on records from last season. They were inevitably going to grade out not well when it comes to strength of schedule. It's just the way the NBA was last season, and the Rockets, even though we're encouraged at them being 41-41, biggest annual wins increase yada, yada. Well, they were still a bottom 5 team in the West. And so mathematically, there was no real way to avoid them having one of the NBA's toughest schedules on paper. Now, as far as teams that they play only 3 times, they've got the Lakers, the Nuggets, the Kings, who else? The Suns, the Jazz, and the Trailblazers. So it's a good cross-section. Some teams are supposed to be good, like the Nuggets, the Kings, the Suns, the Lakers. Some not so good, the Jazz, the Trailblazers. Should also note that they will add 2 games depending on cup results. So if they don't qualify for the quarterfinals, then you'll have 2 games added from that pool of Western Conference teams that you play only 3 times. If they do make the quarterfinals, well, then it depends on who else is advancing in the cup. So to be determined for that second week of December. But the bottom line, that's a good cross-section. That's the way the NBA does it with their scheduling formula, is that most teams in the West, you play 4 times. Those you play 3. Some should be near the top of the conference. Some should be near the bottom, and that's true with the Rockets as well. Will be very different than last year when they played the Nuggets 4 times early in the season. This year, they only played the Nuggets 3 times, and one of them is the season finale on April 13th. So very different schedule this year. But as far as what you were discussing, Paulo, and trying to tie it back into the macro, I do think there's going to be a burden of high expectations, or relatively high expectations. You know, no one should be disappointed if after the first 11 games, they're 6-5. There's a reasonable scenario where you could lose the 3 games to the really good teams, the Thunder, the Mavericks, the Knicks. You lose one of those Spurs games at San Antonio, and then you lose one other game. Maybe it's Memphis, maybe it's Golden State, who, I looked it up, Paulo. The Rockets have not beaten the Warriors in Houston since the 2019 playoffs, Game 3 and Game 4. That's a really long time. They have not beaten the Warriors anywhere since before COVID. February 2020 in Golden State, that was the year the Warriors were basically tanking, and it was the debut of Jeff Green the first time with the Rockets, right after the trade deadline, and the Rockets had just flipped to small ball with Robert Covington in place of Clint Capella. So the Rockets have not beaten the Warriors in a long time. So even if we think the Warriors, getting up there in age, losing Klay Thompson, are a team the Rockets can pass in the standings with their youth, with their expected improvement, until the Rockets actually beat Steph Curry at Toyota Center, I think it's healthy to maintain a certain degree of skepticism. I understand that we've all been traumatized to an extent. So when we talk about a disappointing start, let's not make it out to be like, oh, these first 11 games, they only play 3 contenders where they have to be 8-3 or better or something's wrong. No, we're not saying that. But let's say if, whatever reason, the chemistry isn't right, maybe there's an ill-timed injury, just shot luck doesn't go your way. If you don't start well against a portion of the schedule that should be manageable, a lot of home games as well, we mentioned 11 of the first 18 at home, and then you look at the way the schedule sets up from, I'd say, December onward. So you have a stretch from December 3rd through the 26th where what we know is that they'll have 6 of 7 on the road. And then you'll have likely 2 add-ons depending on cup results. So probably 1 home, 1 road. So you'll have 7 of 9 on the road in all likelihood. Then you have a 5-game homestand. This is the most intriguing homestand of the year. So many good matchups right after Christmas, but look at the teams. Timberwolves, Heat, Mavericks, Celtics, Lakers. Lots of good, fun matchups. Those are difficult teams. And then after that, starting January 7th, that's the 13 of 17 on the road stretch, leading right up to and immediately after the trade deadline. And that's really noteworthy because if the Rockets don't get off to a good start, and then they have this difficult stretch with so many road games and contenders, look, this is a year in which the trade deadline could become much more impactful than we're currently prepared for. You've got 2 guys in Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün who are extension eligible, and Paulo and myself, we both don't expect them to get contract extensions this offseason, largely for cap reasons, flexibility. We don't need to go into why. You can check out our Loggerline archives for that. But the point is, if they don't get extensions this offseason, the Rockets will know that they're likely to become restricted free agents after next season. And so if the team isn't progressing as you expect, either at a team level or individually with some of the players, then that does raise the risk a little bit if you're not willing to max them. And if you were, you'd probably get a deal done now if you're willing to max them under all conditions. Then yeah, there could be some hard decisions to be had if you get close to the trade deadline and you're underachieving with one or both of those guys. If you think that there's some risk in the offseason because they might not fit into all scenarios, then yeah, there's some hard conversations that might need to be had in early February, especially because one of the reasons you wouldn't extend them, if you do extend them, makes them very difficult to trade the first year of it wouldn't be the first year of the contract, but after signing the extension, you preserve the trade optionality if you don't extend them. So that's another thing to keep in mind. I would also point to Fred VanVleet. Look, if you think that you're going to turn down his team option in 2025 and you have grand plans in free agency, well, if this season isn't going well for one reason or another, it doesn't seem like you're going to have a realistic chance to make the postseason, which is not my expectation, but I'm just saying if things don't go well for one reason or another, I could see the Rockets exploring trades involving Fred at the deadline, because if you're going to lose him in the offseason anyway, potentially, because you're turning down his team option to get all this cap space and try and bring in a more impactful player at that point, then what if you could trade Fred at the deadline for expiring contracts and draft equity to a team that would see more benefit in the value of Fred as a player this season? Again, I'm not saying that's my expectation, but is there a world where we know going into 2025, the optionality with Fred's contract, and you do have a couple of guys in Amen Thompson and Reece Shepherd that are potential drop-in replacements at point guard if you decide to pivot as a franchise? Yes, there's a world where you extend Fred to, a 2-3 year deal at a lower average annual value, and he sticks around, he can flourish off ball. Yeah, there's a world where Fred sticks around for a while. There's also a world where if things aren't going well this season, that, maybe you pivot to one of the younger guys at that position. And you say, hey, if we're going to likely move on from Fred for financial reasons, no matter what, then maybe we try and move him for expirings and draft equity at the trade deadline that gives us more flexibility when it comes to making bigger deals in the offseason. Not saying I expect any of that, but because of that, because inherently, if you don't extend Jalen or Şengün, there is a little more risk factor with those guys. It just comes with the territory, because Fred effectively is doing into the last year of his contract. That's 3 of your 5 starters, probably your 3 best players going into the year, where I don't think we can say 100% that they're going to be on the team a year from now. I think, especially with Jalen and Şengün, it's likely, but I wouldn't say it's 100% no matter what. So if you don't take advantage of a weak stretch of the schedule, and if all those road games prove as difficult as they appear to be on paper, we know how the Rockets struggled on the road as a young team for most of last season, then all of a sudden that trade deadline becomes very, very interesting leading into an offseason where the Rockets do have a lot of financial flexibility and could sort of pivot as a franchise if they think they need to. So again, not saying any of that is my expectation, but when we talk about the bullish scenario, it should lead off the pod. Look, get off to a good start and, put yourself on the path to making the playoffs and, taking the leap forward as a team and individually. There's also a bear scenario if it doesn't work out, that there's some difficult conversations that Rafael Stone and Ime Udoka might have to have in early February. So because of that, what I keep going back to is there is a little bit of a burden to start this year. There's opportunity, but there's some pressure there as well, because if for some reason they don't start off on the right foot, then this thing could get pretty daunting quickly in a difficult Western Conference, right?
Yeah, although I will say, I think I would probably say I'm more confident out of the 3 guys. I think Şengün is the one I'm more confident will be here by the end of the season.
Agree.
But after him, I would actually say Fred's more likely to be here than Jalen. Yeah, and that may be a hot take, but I think it's just a product of how inconsistent Jalen has been. And you combine on top of that Fred's contract, even if they don't plan on bringing him back, it's actually really tough to trade, because it's a really high number, and if the Rockets want to
you're above 40.
Flexible, and if the Rockets want to remain flexible, to get up to that number on just expiring money would be really tough.
Hard.
And then, although Fred's really good, if we're letting him go, I'm assuming he's going to have kind of a down season, and at that point, you have to be better than whatever the expiring money coming back is. And a lot of, for the past few years, it's been really easy to come across expiring money because there were a lot of remnants of the KV2 Warriors offseason and all of those contracts. Well, all of those are gone now. And so there's actually very much fewer bad contracts that are expiring right now around the league than there used to be, or very few, previous mammoth deals that have become expirings now. I think
now you could do a 3 or 4 team scenario, but yeah, I get your point. It's harder to make the math work, or you could ask for contracts that are viewed as positive trade value, so you could offload in the offseason if you need, but that does add another layer of risk. So I get your point. Yeah, it is more complicated to get to Fred's figure at above $40 million.
Sure, and I think, but regardless, not to touch on the same points that you did, I'll focus my kind of outlook on one thing in one player, or I'll make it 2 players. A lot of people are going to talk about Alperen Şengün because he's the best player on the team. A lot of people are going to talk about Jalen Green because he has the highest delta or the highest variance when it comes to his play. I think the biggest upgrade the Rockets could make this offseason, or are making it, hopefully it remains that way, is having Tyrese and fully healthy and able to play 25 to 30 minutes a season. He's just a massive contributor towards winning. Really good defender, really good, leader on the court, defensively and offensively, and his transition play creates a lot of turnovers. Really good rebounder. One of those guys that, just tirelessly working every single time, every single play, and that, obviously influences the entire team. And with Ime Udoka, those problems weren't as visible, but I think Tyrese brings a new level of, just not giving up. And I think he's, completely transformative to what this team can be. And it's not just that he was unavailable last season, it was that when he was available, he was often being managed and not playing,
25 minutes per game limit. Yeah,
all of the minutes that he could play. And I truly expect him to play 30 plus this season. I expect him to play at the very minimum top 3 minutes on this team. I think there will still be games where Jalen's average minutes goes down because he's not going to close games if he's not playing well enough. I think Şengün's a pretty solid, 30 plus minutes a night. Fred as well. I think after that, Tyrese is going to be the guy with the most minutes played, as long as hopefully there's no injuries. And I think if you add Tyrese into last year's team, full time, no injury, I think that's 4 to 5 games that Rockets win that they wouldn't have won. And 4 to 5 games in the NBA season is massive. That's the difference between being a 41-win team and a 45 to 46-win team, which is, I don't know if you want to get into it right now, but that is what my bar is for the season. I think 45 to 46 wins is what the expectation.
My number was 45. Yeah, I'm right there with you. And that should get you in the play-in at a minimum. I mean, it would have last season, even in a strong Western Conference. And this is a year where with the Clippers losing Paul George, Warriors getting older and losing Klay Thompson, Suns, who knows what happens there. It could be a little lower than 45. I don't think it's fair to say 45 is the expectation moving forward. That was a historically strong West. And it could be that, 42, 43 is enough this year.
Yeah, and I think 45 would be enough to get us into the playoffs next year. I think last year was just insanely fluky.
By the way, did you notice with the national TV? So Rockets are getting a little more respect. Last year they had, just going into the year, I think 3 national TV games and 2 of them were NBA TV. This year there's 11. Now 8 of the 11 are NBA TV, just 3 on TNT or ESPN. Obviously those can be added at a later date. If it turns out the Rockets are really good, that number can increase. But 11 relative to 3, that's definitely a decent bump. But of those 8 NBA TV, 4 are in the final 2 weeks of the season that stretch against the Lakers, the Suns, the Clippers. So reading between the lines, the league expects the Rockets to be relevant. That's why they're sort of slating in their initial draft to the schedule those games to be on TV. So it's not just us hyping up the team and saying, they went 41-41, so they should be a few wins better. No, I think if you look at how the league set up the schedule and its broadcast partners decided which games to put on national TV, the broadcast partners expect the Rockets to be relevant as well. And so that's just a little thing as well. It's not just us being homers. There are people around the league that expect this Rockets team to be relevant and to be in that conversation.
Yeah, and we also have 2, I think it's interesting. We have 2 TNT send-off games because TNT is losing the rights. That hasn't changed, right?
Right.
So we'll have.
This is the last year. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the last year, and we'll have kind of both, but the both ends of the spectrum. We'll have a grit and grind game against Memphis, and probably a shootout against Sacramento, judging by how these teams have played in the past. So that will be really interesting. But just to close out the point that I was making, moving out of Tyrese, and the other guy I was going to mention is Amen Thompson. I think the Rockets are in I think someone brought up this comparison, and I hadn't thought about it, but I actually kind of like it, which is the comp for a man being Iguodala.
Yeah, I could see that.
Because early on he struggled with
hopefully he could all more of a handle, but yeah, I see the point.
And I think defensively that's a really good comp, and I think like Iguodala, a man can be someone, and he already was last year, but I think he can expand on that and be useful in more ways and less restrictive of the lineup you can have on the floor in others. And I think that, those two can trend up and down throughout his career and hopefully become a really useful player because of it. But I think combining a man with Tari Eason, I think their styles fit together so well. And the fact that Tari Eason at this point is already a 36% three-point shooter, so he's obviously not, a sharpshooter, but he's someone you can trust to at least be respected on the three-point line. If possession ends with a Tari Eason 3, I'm going to be happy 90% of the time. I think having those guys play together, and that combined with not having any minutes where none of them are on the floor, would be really interesting from a rotation perspective. I know it's hard to pull off unless you start Tari Eason, and I don't know how Dylan Brooks feel about that, but I think that's going to be a very real discussion in the first couple of weeks of the season. But I think Amen is going to be the other X factor. I think we mostly know what to expect from everybody else. Obviously, I'm a big Kalen guy. I don't really expect him to stop being inconsistent all of a sudden. I'd be really happy if he was going to, but I don't think he will. So expecting his inconsistency, I think these two guys will be the biggest factors. And I truly think that this season will go a lot better just from having Tari and having Amen upgrade from what he was last year, because there's really nothing Amen could get worse at. I think his defense is, surefire. He was one of the best defenders in the league last year. He's going to be one of the best defenders in the league this year. He's probably the guy I trust on the team the most, and that's saying a lot when we have Dylan Brooks and Tari Eason. Probably the guy I trust the most to put on the ball on any given star on any given night. Call it KD. From KD to Steph Curry, he's probably the guy I trust the most to put on any of these guys. And so him upgrading, even if he doesn't have the jump shot yet, even if the handle isn't there yet, just, him having the reps from his first year carrying into the second year, and he's someone we saw even defensively. We saw the progress he made defensively within the same game. Like, guys would get him with moves in the beginning of the game, and by the end of the game, he was locking them up. I think one of the most notorious ones was DeMar DeRozan, where he was fighting for a lot of bump fakes, and by the end of the game, he wasn't fighting for none. And so I think, as I said, just to conclude the point, Tari Eason and the Men Thompson are going to be, are X factors for this team moving into the season.
I'll spotlight one other guy that I think the schedule could play well for, at least in a team construct, and that's Jalen. Because I spent some time earlier talking about sort of the bearish implications, and it could be for Jalen in specific, given his contractual situation leading into the trade deadline. But look, historically, Jalen has been a better player in the second half of seasons than the first. And so from that perspective, if you have a weaker schedule towards the front of the year, then if Jalen gets going in the second half, then perhaps that's sort of the kick you need to help you against a schedule that's more difficult. Now, hopefully Jalen gets more consistent. That's the ideal scenario. We're just talking about what we've seen to this point, because I do agree with generally what you were saying, which is that Jalen's been so inconsistent, it would be foolish to act like he's kicked that issue simply because he had a great March. No, you can be optimistic, you can have hope, but at the same time, you don't have to be all in as far as your expectations on thinking that the guy he was in March is who he is from this point forward. No, until he does it on a more sustained basis, it's fair to have some skepticism. So if the broader trends hold and he's stronger in the second half of the year, then perhaps that plays better to this upcoming Rockets season, because the schedule is going to be more difficult then. Whereas the beginning of the year, if he's a little bit weaker then, well, the easier schedule might help you withstand that a little bit. One other thing I should mention as far as the trade deadline. So I talked about sort of the bearish case, and then the 13 of 17 road games leading up to February 8th, which is right around the deadline. Starting February 9th, you have a stretch with 13 of 17 at home. So if you're close, if it's sort of like, I could go one way, could go the other, then maybe that nudges you in the direction of letting it play out the rest of the year and waiting until the offseason for anything more major when you have a natural pivot point due to all the cap room anyway, if you're on the fence, because Jalen historically is a better second half player, and also you will have 13 of 17 at home. So if it's sort of in that in-between range, then maybe that's something that could sort of nudge you in that direction. But again, a lot of points, data points that is, to be gleaned between now and then, so I don't want to speculate too much. I think, bottom line, the way the Rockets are looking at this season, and it defined what they did and didn't do this offseason, they just want more data. They want to learn more about their young players. There were opportunities they had this offseason to cash some of their chips in, to make more of an aggressive win-now move. They chose not to do it because it would be too risky with some of these young guys that, still have a lot of variance in terms of how their careers are going to progress. So more than anything, you want this season to be meaningful so that you can learn more. And regardless, I think they should be able to do that. And hopefully the schedule sets up well for them to have meaningful games throughout the season. And so I want to focus most of our discussion on the start, because how the final 2-3 months plays out, I mean, there's a lot of different things that can happen between now and then that can influence exactly how we feel at that time. I think the most important thing for the Rockets is getting off on the right foot, because if you do that, then obviously that puts the players individually and the team as a whole in the right frame of mind to keep playing hard, to be bought in. And so hopefully we don't even have to talk about those bear scenarios as you get closer to the trade deadline and the potential of anything major happening in terms of a transaction that might reshape the roster. So in terms of the start to the year, mentioned the first 11 games, which you've got. I know we can quibble over, what is Memphis going to look like with Ja Morant and Desmond Bane back. But look, you've got, of those 11 teams, the Pistons, the Wizards, the Hornets, the Spurs 3 times, you're going to be favored in an awful lot of games. And then you've got 11 of your first 18 at home. By the way, in terms of the home schedule, it's their first home opener since 2019, pre-COVID. 20 of their 40 home games they're scheduled at this point are on the weekend. So if you're thinking about potentially buying tickets and coming out, it's a pretty strong schedule, including the most lucrative games right around the holiday, around Christmas and New Year. So it's going to be a fun time to be a Rockets fan with a much better team. But in terms of projecting the performance, to circle back to that, how they start the year is going to be very impactful. One thing that's really interesting for this particular Rockets team, so the NBA has a trend where you're seeing more mini series like baseball to sort of help with travel logistics. You're having teams play twice in the same arena, either back-to-back or in a span of 3 or 4 days. So especially early in the year, you see this with the Rockets schedule. They've got 2 in San Antonio on the 26th and 28th of October. Those are the 3rd and 4th games of the season. Then November 13th and 15th, you've got 2 straight games against the Clippers on Wednesday and Friday, the second being the opener of NBA Cup play for the Rockets. Then the next weekend, Friday the 22nd and Saturday the 23rd of November, you got back-to-back home games against the Trailblazers, and the Friday one is game 2 of Cup play. So one thing that's sort of interesting about that is that when you put multiple games against the same opponent in close proximity, it allows teams to game plan much more specifically for the matchup than they normally can. Because typically when you have 3 or 4 games in a week and you might have just 1 or 2 non-game day practices, you've just got to focus on you and your system, and you can't get too dialed in for one particular opponent and trying to, play to their strengths or weaknesses the way you would if it was in the playoffs. However, if you have 2 straight games against the same opponent, in the case of the Spurs, you've actually got 3 games in your first 8 against them and the preseason finale, you can game plan a little bit more. And so if you have a team that's got more continuity to it, that's got more chemistry, because the Rockets have so many returning players, as we mentioned off the top, that should benefit you. And if you think your team has a strong coaching staff, which I do think the Rockets do, led by Ime Udoka, then that type of schedule that's more playoff-like in nature, I do think that could be beneficial to the Rockets and further help them in this stretch early in the year. So that's something to sort of keep in the back of your mind when we look at this sort of unique schedule to lead off. I think there's some factors between the chemistry, the continuity, and the Rockets having a coaching advantage that could play well to them. Now, I know the Spurs with Greg Popovich certainly have a very well-respected coach as well, but the Spurs a lot younger. You also have the one veteran you brought in, Chris Paul. Well, he's brand new to the team, so that's not nearly the same when it comes to the chemistry and continuity angles. So I think that could be a little thing that helps the Rockets early in the year as well. The other thing to watch out for is cup play. So we're talking about the first 11 games. That's pre-cup. And then the teams that are in the Rockets group stage, which are the Clippers, the Trailblazers, the Timberwolves, and the Kings. Timberwolves and Kings, Rockets will play on the road in group play, Clippers and Blazers at home. And 4 teams for conference, the winners of each of the 3 5-team groups, and the best of the second place teams, 1 wildcard team, will advance to the 8-team quarterfinals. And just as we saw with the Pacers last year, the Cup was designed to benefit younger teams. Younger teams that are trying to make their mark in the league are going to weight those a little more heavily. They're going to see more juice to it because they haven't been there. They're not just biding time until the playoffs. No, being on the big stage, they can get to the semifinals, the championship in Las Vegas. The spotlight, it's a big deal to them. We saw the Pacers ride that to, well, they lost, got to the championship game of the Cup last season and ultimately ended up in the Eastern Conference Finals. I think the Rockets would love to replicate that template. And I think we talk about the start to the year, providing the Rockets an opportunity. If they do well in Cup play, that's something that they can sort of ride the momentum of as well. And I do think it sets up pretty well for them. I mean, to me, the swing game, when you look at their Cup chances, is that opener at home against the Clippers. And there's some storylines there, obvious ones, James Harden, Kevin Porter Jr. returning to Houston. No, I do not think there will be a KPJ tribute video. But look, if you can take that opener against the Clippers, who should be worse without Paul George, and it is at home, I think the Rockets will be heavy favorites at home against the Trailblazers, who are the worst team in the group. And then the road game at Sacramento, I think the Rockets actually match up very well against the Kings. They were 3-0 against them last year. I think Şengün against Sabonis is a favorable matchup. And I also think Jalen Green does very well against teams that don't have a traditional rim protector. So even though the Kings are on the road, I actually like that matchup for the Rockets. Keep in mind, we all think of that Sacramento game in March as the one Şengün got hurt. But it was actually one of the Rockets' most encouraging performances of the year. They went on the road against a playoff team in the West and just controlled that game throughout after a little bit of a sluggish start. And Şengün and Jalen were both big parts of that, even before the Şengün injury, which just happened to be in the closing seconds of that game. So I like the matchup of the King. The Timberwolves matchup is a difficult one. Timberwolves, one of the best teams in the West, and also the double big lineup has been tough on the Rockets in the past. So that one, the Rockets will be decided underdogs. But look, if the Rockets can take that opener against the Clippers, to me, there's a path to them being 3-1, and 3-1 gives you a chance to either win your group or, depending on point differential, that's the most frequent tiebreaker, perhaps win a wild card and get into the quarterfinals. And I do think the Rockets, like the Pacers last year, are a team that would disproportionately benefit. So, don't want to print our NBA Cup champions shirts just yet. But on paper, I think it's a pretty manageable group. I mean, beating the Clippers at home, no Paul George, I think that's doable. And if you can win that opener against the Clippers, I think there's a pretty clear path to 3-1. Paulo, would you sort of agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's definitely easier than it was last year. And I think that, as you said, the Timberwolves are clearly a team that we're probably not going to beat, especially because Anthony Edwards is, I expect, to be taking another leap probably into MVP contention. And, I don't know how reliable Jalen Green will be offensively, but usually he's the one who struggles a lot against the Timberwolves, especially against Rudy Gobert, because...
Right, it's the opposite of the Kings matchup. The Kings don't have a rim protector. The Timberwolves have one of the best in the game.
Yeah, I think we'll... And I think, especially they made again with the tools we have playing against the Kings, I think we will slow them down more than they'll be able to speed us up, if that makes sense. I think you can put a man Thompson on De'Aaron Fox, and I think Albertino does a decent enough job against Sabonis, and then I think we'll be able to play better defense against them. And I think they are just completely outmatched defensively against us. I don't think they can touch us at all. And so, typically, at least judging from last season, we were better at teams that didn't cause us too many problems on offense by being weak defensively than we were against teams that played the same style that we did. We were a very scrappy team, right? But, if the offense comes by easy, I think it's a bigger benefit to us than it would be for a team that is already good offensively. I know that's really doesn't... I know it's kind of convoluted the way I put it, but I think the Kings are a good matchup for us. And I think last year I don't want to say it was scripted, but it was pretty convenient that the team that won was the team that won. Obviously LeBron, yeah. So I think this year,
I'm not saying, but I am saying.
Yeah, I think this year, I don't think the Lakers are going to win this year. And I think,
by the way, I think
good. Yeah,
I think the Rockets. So from a basketball standpoint, of course, they want to advance in the cup. But there is a scenario where the Lakers are one of the teams they only play 3 times, and as the schedule currently sets up, they only have 1 home game to monetize against LeBron and AD. So in the scenario where the Rockets and Lakers don't advance to the knockout stage, then there's a pretty decent chance that the Lakers would end up being the add-on game for the Rockets in December, which from a business standpoint would be fantastic. So I know we mostly care about basketball here, but business-wise, the consolation game against the Lakers would not be the worst thing in the world either. Just wanted to throw that in there since you were mentioning them.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, the knockout games don't count towards the...
No, they do. They do. The quarterfinals and semifinals do. The championship does not.
That's it. Okay.
The championship doesn't. Yeah, because that would give you the odd number of 83. But yeah, if you get to the quarterfinals and the semifinals, it does. And then the way it works out, so if you don't make the quarterfinals, there's 2 basically add-on consolation games, if you will, which is where the Lakers game at home could potentially come into play. If you get to the quarterfinals and lose, then your second game is against the other loser from your conference. So it's sort of like, the teams in the Olympic tournament men's basketball that lose in the semifinals will play for the bronze medal. And so you can call it 5th place in the cup if you want, I guess. But that's where the other game would come from. If you lose the quarterfinal, then you would have a consolation game, also part of the regular season, against the other quarterfinal loser from the West.
Yeah, and so that kind of makes me think perhaps Canada want us to advance because we'll probably face harder teams for the regular season if we advance than if we don't.
Yeah, decent chance.
I think that makes sense, right? So
yeah, it's sort of like convoluted that way as well. Yeah, you would probably get a little bit weaker teams and get to play at home if you don't advance. Because if the Rockets, even if they do advance, unless you finish in the top 2, then you wouldn't get the home game in the quarterfinals, and then beyond that, it's in Vegas. So, yeah, you could actually have a better chance at having maximizing your odds over 82 games, having the best record by not advancing. As weird as that is, although I guess it's offset by the fact that if you do advance, then you inherently won more of those group stage games. But yeah, you're probably going to add your add-in games in that second week of December will probably be easier if you don't advance.
Which is ironic because I started off the pod saying we're at the point where we shouldn't care about the opponent. We should just face any team.
I think the best scenario, if you wanted to strategically sort of maximize your value over, best 82 game record, would be to go 3-1 and just sort of tie for, either the group stage lead or tiebreaker, but lose on point differential. And so that way you win most of the group stage games, but you don't get the harder games of advancing. So if you wanted to be as cold and calculating as possible, then the 3-1 record where you lose on tiebreakers would probably be optimal.
Yeah, it would make no sense to take it at all because, the game that you're tanking would be the game that you're trying to favor in afterwards. But anyways, as a European sports fan, the entire cup play thing is something that's very dear to me because usually the cup thing is where teams that don't have as big of a chance of winning the league, let's call it, they give their all in the cup championship because that's it's kind of consolation profit that they can take home, and they're usually pretty prestigious competition. So I hope that the incident tournament eventually becomes that, and I think it can give obviously it's completely different from what a playoff series is, but it can give you a little taste of what it is to prepare for a team in specific and have the kind of stakes, although the stakes aren't really that big, but some stakes
they feel bigger if you're a team in the Rockets position, just like they did for the Pacers last year. I think that's the idea, and I do think there's something to that. So that's why, by and large, I want the Rockets to win and advance. And hey, if they somehow win the cup, dude, we're having a parade. Probably not literally, but we'll have our own mini Rockets Twitter parade somewhere in Houston right around Christmas, because after what we've been through to start this decade, God, that would feel amazing. But a lot of games to go to get to that point. But we can dream. That's what the offseason is about. All right, so we already gave our sort of wins and losses expectations going into the year. I think we're both in the 45 to 46 range, assuming health. We've got one other topic I wanted to cover, but Paulo, before we turn the page to our non-schedule topic of discussion, is there anything else that you wanted to cover for the schedule? I think I'm done with everything I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, I guess I'll take the time to mention something that you mentioned earlier in the pod that I didn't intervene back then, but I do want to say the Golden State Warriors statistic that you mentioned is absolutely ridiculous, and I'll just take these couple of seconds to have, my typical rant of, guys, we gotta stop having MVP chants for Steph Curry at the center. It's the most embarrassing thing I've ever seen in all of sports from a fan base. It's just absolutely ridiculous, and the team's good now. So there's no reason for there not to be more Rockets fans than there are Warriors fans at the center. That's all I'm gonna say. I know people will usually come after me for that because I am not able to be at the games, but trust me, if I lived there, I would be.
I will say I hate in the past week how likable Steph Curry is coming off. Obviously, he saved Team USA in the Olympics, which we'll get to momentarily. Also, he has a new comedy on Peacock called Mr. Throwback, which I watched. I was planning on hate watching it, but it's actually pretty funny. So yeah, Steph's having a good off season from a basketball and a PR perspective. And so, much as I hate the guy on the basketball court, he does seem to be, well, A, a good guy, and B, he absolutely saved the Americans in the Olympics with his performances in the semifinals against Serbia, and then closing out France in the gold medal game with just a barrage of three-pointers in the last 3 minutes of that game. So kudos to him for that, but that could be the highlight of his 2024, because the Rockets are going to kick his ass once the calendar turns to November. At least that's what we'll tell ourselves, because certainly the Rockets are due for that after all of the losses that they've taken. It's weird because certainly the Warriors, you go back to 2015, had all those playoff series wins against the Rockets, but by and large, it was competitive, certainly in the playoffs and in the regular seasons as well. The Warriors had the upper hand. They won the series, but the James Harden-era Rockets had their share of game wins against the Warriors. There were moments where we know what Harden did in the Unguardable tour in San Francisco, or at the time it was in Oakland, but you get the idea. At Oracle, we know the massive games he had in the 2019 playoffs against the Warriors. It wasn't like they were devoid of highlights altogether, as opposed to, again, the last 5 years. And of course, that coincides largely with the Rockets going into a rebuild. But to not have any games at all that you can point to against the Warriors, not even a fluke regular season game where somebody goes off for 40 and you win. To have lost, I think it's 13 straight against them and not having a home win against them in more than 5 years, that is absolutely ridiculous against any NBA team, especially one from your same conference. So hopefully the Rockets are due. First opportunity will be Saturday, November 2nd, in what should be a pretty lively atmosphere at Toyota Center, the 6th game of the season. Rockets will be 5-0 because, well, probably won't be, but we're hoping they will be. You did see that that corgi. Rockets put out a schedule release video like a lot of teams, and theirs was the infamous Twitter corgi that is the prediction mascot for a lot of games, has the Rockets going 82-0. Spoiler alert, the owner of the corgi, the human owner that is, works at Toyota, so the Rockets had, through their sponsor, a little bit of an end there. But regardless, corgi said the Rockets are going 82-0, 83-0 if you count the extra cup game, so I'm going to say the corgi is right, and let's roll with that. That means going 5-0 in the first week of the season, and then steamrolling the Warriors for a long overdue win on that Saturday, November 2nd game. All right. Speaking of the Olympics, and this will be our last topic. I know we're an hour in and we need to wind this down. So the U.S. just wrapped up their gold medal run. It's their 5th straight gold, and it's been a while since the Rockets have had a representative on Team USA. James Harden was on the 2012 Olympic team, but he had yet to be traded to the Rockets. That happened in October. Olympics were in August, and he wasn't on 2016 or 2020. Obviously, Rockets, very young and rebuilding at this point, didn't have any reps in 2024. And so you have to go back at least to, obviously, Hakeem in 96 was the first. I can't remember if Tracy McGrady was on either the 04 or 08 Olympic team. He might have been, not for sure on that. I would have to look back. But the point is, you got to go back to either the 90s or the 2000s. Obviously, Yao Ming, but he was for Team China. So in terms of being on Team USA, the gold standard for basketball on the world stage, it's been a while for the Rockets to be represented. And that's not to say that they're not represented in the Olympics, even this year. Look, Jock Landale played very well for Team Australia, so did Jack McVeigh. Dylan Brooks started for Team Canada, had his moments. So they do have international representation. Alperen Şengün is the star of Turkey's team. If they can get to the Olympics in 2028, they did not in 2024, then Şengün, assuming health, will certainly be on the team. But in terms of Team USA, which is the gold standard of the sport, it's been a while for the Rockets to be represented. And they've had representation on other teams, like, Harden was on, I believe, the 2014 World Cup and played a huge role there. I can't remember if it's called the World Cup at the time, but the same tournament. But that's a little different because those World Cup teams oftentimes don't have the best of the best. So sometimes those rosters are sort of formed by attrition, who accepts in a non-Olympic year. The Olympics are what truly matters in terms of the international stage among NBA players. And so Rockets have not had a representative on that stage to have the opportunity to do what Steph Curry just did in leading the Americans to that 5th straight gold medal. It's been quite a while. So next Olympics, 2028 in Los Angeles, it will be of significant interest to players around the NBA because, well, every Olympics is, but especially one in the United States. First Olympics here since 1996 when Hakeem Olajuwon was the aforementioned Rockets representative. So the competition for those 12 Olympic spots in 2028 will be intense. Now, I will say it's definitely possible. I could see Ime Udoka being a consideration for the coaching staff. So, Paulo, you can't answer my question with him because I think Steve Kerr is headed that he's likely to retire. If he does so, I think Eric Spoelstra will be next in line. He was the lead assistant this year, and obviously Spo's been a great coach for a while, so Spoelstra would likely take the reins as the head coach. But I could see Ime Udoka, as young as he is, and with the record that he's beginning to accrue in the NBA, I could see Udoka being on the staff of 2028. But let's talk about players. If the Rockets are to somehow have a chance at one or more players in 2028 actually making that roster, who would it be? And so you've got to start with the core 7 minus Şengün. No, I'm not excluding Şengün. Don't call me a hater. That's just because he's not for America. He would be consideration for Turkey if they make it. I hope they do. So core 7 minus Şengün, that gives you Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, Min Thompson, Cam Whitmore, Reed Shepherd. And I'm going to say that of those 6, the roadmap is most difficult for Cam Whitmore and Tari Eason because at picks 20 and 17 in the first round, those aren't typical spots where you would expect a star level trajectory. Now, they certainly have opportunities to evolve into those types of players, but the deck is stacked against you a little bit in terms of having the visibility to be on the radar of the national team. It's not to say that they can't. 4 years is plenty of time. One thing I want to point out, some people will say, oh, why are you talking about the Olympics for the Rockets who don't have a clear superstar at this point? We're talking about 2028. That's a long time. You go back to this point in August of 2020, and you look at this year's Olympic team, Anthony Edwards and Tyrese Halliburton were not on the NBA radar at all. Well, Anthony Edwards was as a prospect, but certainly he was nowhere near being considered NBA superstar. And then Bam Adebayo and Devin Booker were nowhere near in August 2020 being considered Olympic caliber, in my opinion. Booker was putting up numbers, but for a bad Phoenix team that had yet to play in a single playoff game in his tenure, Adebayo had one pretty good season with the Heat. So the point is 4 years is a lot of time for guys to evolve, get a lot better, as we just saw with Anthony Edwards, Tyrese Halliburton, Devin Booker, and Bam Adebayo over the last 4-year cycle. So while none of the Rockets' core 6 of Americans is nearly at an Olympic level right now, there is plenty of time for these guys to evolve and get a lot better between 2024 and 2028. And so, again, looking at those 6, I put Tari and Cam in a slightly lower tier, although you can point out Cam was actually MVP of one of the under 18 USA international teams a couple of years ago. So he is sort of on the radar when it comes to program officials. Should also point out that Jabari Smith Jr. and Amen Thompson were on the select team this offseason, basically meaning they were part of training camp for this Olympics, competed against the national team. So that puts you on the radar. Mark Jones of ESPN said Jabari in particular got rave reviews from people at camp. Jalen Green was on the select team a year ago leading up to the World Cup. So those are guys that are on the radar a little bit. The guys that weren't, Tari Eason and Reed Shepard, I think they haven't had any Team USA ties just because coming out of high school, they were good prospects, but they weren't elite prospects. So you can look at the top 4 cutoff, which, Jalen, Jabari, Amen, and Reed Shepard. So that's one cutoff. You can look at it that way. Guys that are picked in the top 4, the lottery selections are typically better than non-lottery picks. So you could say they have a leg up. And then you look at who has Team USA ties. It would be Jalen, Jabari, Amen, and Cam Whitmore, who did play at an under 18 level. So the 3 guys that check all the boxes, which are previous Team USA experience, be it at youth levels and or the select team, and top 4 draft picks, which typically put you more on the radar around the league, around the world, because those often are strongly correlated with superstar level outcomes, would be Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., and Amen Thompson. All of them have, within the last 13 months, have taken part in Team USA activities. So there's a lot of different ways you can look at who's most likely to be on the radar in 2028. My hot take, and he's nowhere near this level right now, I'm aware of that, but if I had to pick one, I think Jabari may have the cleanest path, simply because, again, the guys who check all the boxes in terms of prerequisites to this point, draft status, Team USA experience, would be Jalen, Jabari, and Amen. But when you look at what's going to have the most utility to the team and what their limitations are as a player, Amen can be an all-world defender, but until the jump shot comes along, you have to worry about, can he be trusted enough as a floor spacer, or is he going to be too much of a liability for those star-level players that he's going to be playing alongside and thus need room to operate? With Jalen, it's that the bar for him as a scorer is so high because he's not really dynamic as a defender. He's not particularly big as a shooting guard. He's not really a facilitator. He needs to be a 30-plus points per game scorer, take on that Anthony Edwards-type leap to truly be Olympic worthy. Because if he's not scoring at a truly elite level, then he's not good enough in these other areas. Jabari is someone that just at year 2, 20 years old, averaging 13 and 8, shooting 36% on threes, if he can just bump it up a little bit, the counting stats, to where he's averaging, say, 16, 17 points, 10 boards a game this year, shoots 38, 39% on threes, defends at a high level, rebounds even better, can capably defend guys at several different positions. A player like that has a ton of utility because they can fit in so many roster constructs. We've talked about that in terms of building the Rockets, but it's also valuable in terms of building an Olympic team. And, Bam Adebayo is a good example of that. Bam's obviously a 4/5. Jabari has a little more utility, isn't quite the same in terms of rim protection, but I think the type of defensive versatility, not needing the ball to make a big-time impact, again, not saying Jabari is there now, but in terms of projecting between now and 2028, I think Jabari has the cleanest path to be a player at that level. It's not that Jalen or Amen can't. They have clear skills. And it's not that, like Reed Shepard in particular, he has a clear skill with his shooting that could be beneficial. You just have to, number one, he's starting at a lower baseline as a rookie, and 2, he's really small. So there's some mitigating factors there. Doesn't have Team USA experience. You can make arguments for Cam and Tari if you want. But for me, I sort of balance it all. And as strange as it might sound, because I don't think Jabari is someone that we think of as being the highest upside among the current Rockets, at least through the prism of who's most likely to have a path to the 2028 Olympic team of the United States, the gold standard, playing in LA at American Games, while admittedly unlikely, I think I would put Jabari at the forefront of my Rockets list in terms of the likelihood of it actually happening. It might just be, 10%, but I would say that he's the most of the current Rockets. So, Paulo, when you're looking at those 6, who would be at the forefront of your list again, this is based on the current team. So no, you can't cheat and say, oh, I think the Rockets are going to trade for Devin Booker and he'll be on the Olympic team again. No, it doesn't work that way. We're talking about the Rockets as currently constructed. If the current Rockets are going to have an Olympian on the 2028 team going for their 6th straight gold medal, who do you think it's most likely to be?
I think it would be disrespectful to say anybody other than Alperen Şengün once he changes nationalities. I think Şengün changing nationalities has a higher chance of happening than any of the good guys we currently have being good enough to make Team USA. I think it would be highly disrespectful to say anything else, and this is totally not in jest, and this is totally not to please a certain type of audience.
And what would happen on social media if Şengün did that, by the way?
This actually wouldn't please that audience, would it?
Yeah, that would be chaos. I sort of want to see it just as, it would be like a train wreck, but I sort of want to see it.
Well.
Okay, so without the cheating Şengün answer, pick one. I'm forcing you to.
I would probably say a man, because I think if we were talking 2 years from now, Jabari would be the safest option. But I think 4 years from now, right, any of the guys need, I think, really dramatic improvement to make it. And I think if the Olympic team is in any way comparable to what it was this year, they didn't
the upside bar is really high. Yeah.
Yeah, and they took Derek White with them, but because he was an injury replacement, and they took Drew Holiday, which he's not really a star, but as far as role players goes, he is as close to a star as there is. And I think the league has a lot of star players at Jabari's position. You've got Tatum, you've got Paulo, you've got Paulo's he played for Team USA this year. I think he already changed. You have Jalen Brown,
Chet Holmgren.
Yeah, you have, just off the top of my head, a lot of guys that would probably be ahead of him. And then not only plays point guard, which I can't really. I mean, you have Halliburton and you have Maxey, but they are completely different types of players to a man. And Halliburton didn't play this year, which begs the question: is his game really the type of game that you want in the Olympics? He's really contacted first, right? And so you have to wonder about that. And then defensively, obviously Maxey is, I don't know how he would hold up against European teams who are typically pretty oversized.
Physical, yeah.
Yeah. And the man obviously gives you 1 through 4 defense right now. And he can play, you can both scale him up to be a star player, and he can very easily be scaled down to a role player, a Swiss Army knife type of guy. So I think Aman is the safest bet, both because of the upside, but also because of the positional versatility that he has. And I think, besides that, I'm not even sure if Jalen wouldn't be ahead of Jabari just because of the upside element. Although he would be always behind Anthony Edwards, who I think for the next 10 years has that on unless he says he doesn't want to go again.
Right. I mean, it's that, and I just think that Jalen has. Well, he probably has more upside than Jabari. It's tricky for me because I feel like sometimes people sleep on Jabari's upside because, number one, defensive players aren't properly valued, I think, in terms of like, just because the team contributions, the defense, there's not the catch-all metrics. And also, while Jabari is not the shiftiest creator, look, if he becomes an elite shooter and he's almost 7 feet tall already, I mean, you can just rise and fire over guys. You don't have to be the world's shiftiest guy if you can shoot that well at his height. So I do think that Jabari's upside is undersold a little bit on certain corners of Rockets Twitter. But yeah, I do agree that as we saw in March, Jalen does have a gear that most players, including Jabari, it's not disrespectful to Jabari, I think it's just the truth. Jalen has a gear that most players in the NBA can't get to. The question is whether he can consistently tap into that gear. But if he does, and I think that's the point you're making, is that it's more about upside, then yeah. And, I was thinking of it more in terms of how a player would fit around, in my head, the thought exercise I did was sort of putting Rockets players, if they develop the way we think they can, around a team like the 2024 Olympic team. And it's easier for me to see Jabari as plug and play as he is, having value in that type of setting. But to your point, and that's a fair one that I hadn't really considered, it's not just how they fit around the team, but it's also who are they competing with to get on that spot. And so if Jabari is competing with, with Tatum, with Paulo, with Chet Holmgren, with other guys at his position, then maybe there's less guys that Jalen and Amin are directly competing against. That's a valid perspective too.
Although, depending on how the careers of these guys go, Mouser are still really young. I would guess that Team USA's biggest weakness is probably center. 4 years from now, Bam will still be 30. I guess 2 Olympics from now. And in between now and then, there will probably be some centers drafted, right?
Yeah.
But I would guess
Jabari is a 5. That would be interesting.
That's what they brought Anthony Davis and Bam Adebayo this year, and
but Chet Holmgren might be ahead of him. Well, Chet Holmgren would be ahead of him in the pecking order now, but obviously it depends on how Chet and Jabari develop over the next few years.
Yeah, no, but I mean, they brought Anthony Davis and Bam Adebayo, who are a specific type of center, very switchable, right? Chet's probably more of a drop center, although he's mobile.
No, he can switch, but how will he age? Yeah.
So I would guess Jabari has an angle there, and I know because of pedigree, Tariq has a smaller chance, but I think he's someone who impresses a lot of coaches in the NBA.
I mean, Ime threw out the Kawhi Leonard comp. And while it's unlikely to get there, I mean, look, Kawhi was a mid-first round pick the same way Tari was because he had some of the same questions coming out of college. So, he would have to hit at a very high level. But to your point, the path is there.
I mean, even if... I'm sorry, my voice is struggling. I mean, even if we were talking about from a role player plug-and-play level, I think Tari has, and there's been numerous coaches who have talked about Tari, and if we're projecting outcomes that are, plug-and-play role player for Jabari, I think Tari will definitely fit those a little bit better as he gets to be more well-known, even though he doesn't have the Team USA ties.
Yeah, and his ability to defend the perimeter. I mean, conceivably, he could be like a somewhat bigger version of Jrue Holiday in terms of the role he played for this team. Not saying he's anywhere near that player now, but just in terms of projecting like idealistic outcomes 4 years from now. So, yeah, that's an interesting one. So, want to stress as we close out the pod, I think it's definitely time because A, it's been over an hour, and B, Paulo, I know you've got COVID, your voice is going a little bit. We're not expecting any of these guys to necessarily be 2028 Olympians. We're just talking idealistically, if it works out, who fits. And so all of these guys, we're talking, top 10% outcomes. Not saying any of it is likely, just talking about, interesting as things set up. And some of it may be, look, who wants to go the extra mile and compete in international tournaments in 2026, 2027, when there's more opportunities likely to be had because not as many big names will do it. That could come into it as well. Who's willing to do it? Who's healthy? And who takes advantage of an opportunity? If there's a team that not that many big names are on, can Jabari or Jalen or Amin or whoever it is seize the opportunity to go out there and play well, and by virtue of playing well for the U.S. national team on the world stage, perhaps leading them to a first-place finish, then that can be the type of thing that propels them even more onto the Olympic radar for 2028. Again, acknowledge it's unlikely. Just talking, it's the dead period of the NBA offseason. Let's have some fun. And so hopefully our listeners enjoyed that. Anyway, we'll bring it to a close here because Paulo's voice is going, and come on, we're over an hour anyway. So we've got to save some stuff for future episodes because we still have more than a month until training camp. So let's save some of these conversations for our next pod in a couple of weeks when I'm sure we can have some more macro discussions, shelve the micro until closer to training camp in late September. And of course, we'll start getting tidbits when the Rockets report and start the preseason on October 7th against the Jazz, 4 games leading up to that October 23rd regular season opener. So that will do it for today. And until next time, if you want to get a hold of Paulo or myself, the best place as always to do that is on Twitter/X, where Paulo's on there at Paulo Alves NBA. I'm on there at DuBose, and the show is on there at The Logger Line, or if you hit up the link tree in the bio, x.com/The Logger Line, you can not only find our great partners and sponsors, Sports Talk 790, Carbach Brewing, USA Today's Rockets, where consume their content. That would make us look good. But beyond that, you can also find the distributors of this program. All the major podcasts have it, podcast platforms, that is, Apple, Google, Spotify. Subscribe, leave a positive review if you've not already, and that way you get benefit of episodes right when they come out, and we get benefit, hopefully, with your positive review, along with your subscription of looking good to those aforementioned friends, partners, and sponsors, and keeping this program running as one of the most active podcasts covering Houston Rockets basketball. All right, with those plugs complete, we will adjourn. For Paulo Alves, I'm Ben DuBose. Thanks as always to you all for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.